Hey guys, it's AJ with Relentless Racing. I am proud to announce that PCI will be sponsoring us, or Pro Car Innovations, and they developed some great products for the DC2, all spherical stuff. This is the rear. This is the rear lower control arm, all spherical like I said. It's aluminum, it's solid, it's anodized. It's beautiful. The engineering on here is really, really good. Check out this camber adjustment, all sphericals again. Really, really nice construction on there. And check out the trailing arm bushing. The trailing arm bushing has a nice bronze, high tolerance bushing on here. We're going to lube this thing up a little bit and then install that thing in there. And then here is the toe, the solid toe piece. Again, it's aluminum, and it has spherical bearings in there. You can see them inside there. These are the spacers on there, and quite stunning pieces. I'll show you how to put these things in next. All right, I took the wheel off of the Relentless Racing DC2, and I'm just gonna go over real quickly what you have to take apart to get all these parts in. So the first thing I did was I pulled this little pin out right here, and that releases this little pin right here. So that's a little lock. Pull this guy out, and then that is the cable for the emergency brake. Make sure that your emergency brake is not engaged. Disengage the emergency brake. Otherwise, that thing, you'll have trouble taking that thing off. And then I actually took off the caliper, and to take off the caliper, you got to take off this 14mm right here, and there's one up at the top. This one right here, you got to take that one off right behind the cable. So take the cable off and take that thing off, and then obviously you got to take off the attachments to the rear sway bar. That'll be this guy, and this guy right here. And then let me switch to the other side. Here's the other side. This is the sway bar attachment. Disconnect that. And then also you may want to disconnect these two guys right here. This is the thing that holds, this is a little bracket. These are two 12mm that hang on to the brake line. And then as we move on down here, I'd remove this guy as well. This is 12mm. Again, that is for the emergency brake line. And then you got to remove this guy right here. This is a 17mm. That's the trailing arm bushing. And then you have to remove the other side of the trailing arm bushing as well. See that? And then there's the toe arm right there. So the toe arm, we want to release this guy, and then I'd loosen this one right over here. These are 14mm. Loosen this one. Just, you don't have to take it out, but loosen it, and then allow this arm to drop down like that. And don't forget to take off this guy right here. These are 14mm, and eventually you'll have to take this one off too. It's also 14mm, and that is the camber adjustment. Okay guys, let's take off the emergency brake. Again, before you remove the emergency brake cable, you got to make sure that the emergency brake is not engaged. So make sure you go inside the car, put the emergency brake down. So all we've got to do is we got to pull on this pin right here and pull it out just a little bit. Get it undone. Got the pin off right here, and then we're just going to pop this pin out just like that. And we're gonna slide this guy out like this. So a little further down along the emergency cable line is a little clip that we need to release. So I'm gonna use these 90-degree needle and pliers. I'm gonna attach them right about here. And then I'm gonna lift with my hand. Check that out. I'm gonna clamp with my right hand, and I'm gonna lift this guy and twist it with my left hand to pop that clip out. And you can see that it's slowly coming out there, and there it is. There's the clip. And then we can just push this guy right through here. And then once we released the next line through here, we'll be able to release that. I'll show you that next. Okay, so now I'm underneath the car, and this is another bracket that is hanging on to the emergency cable line. So just to give you an orientation, here is the trailing arm bushing, and so it's just on the back side of that, and this is right along the trailing arm. Again, I'm underneath the car and I'm looking out. So that's a 12 millimeter. I'm just going to pop that thing off. Now that the emergency cable is released, it's released here, and the section that we just did on the inside of the car on the other side of trailing arm bushing, I'm going to take the cable and I'm going to push it through this section here just to get it to release. Okay. And then, after we do that, we're going to move to the other side, right over here. And you can see this section right here. We need to get this thing, pop that through, and then we're going to pull the cable out and push it through there. Just going to push the cable right through the trailing arm. You can see it dropping. And then we just leave that thing down. Okay, so now I am underneath the car again, and I'm looking back towards the back of the car. This is the attachment for the sway bar. It's 14 millimeter, and we're going to zap that puppy out. Make sure that you understand the orientation of these little items that are on here. So that it has a little spacer right here, this guy, this spacer. Make sure that you understand those orientation. There's one here. There's this guy right here. This is a spacer. And the sharp edge goes towards the heim joint. The sharp edge right there goes towards the heim joint. All right, so now we're going to disconnect the lower arm. We have to release the lower arm here, 14 millimeter, the shock 14 millimeter, and then 14 millimeter at the chassis over here. So let's knock those things out. Most of them are fixed fastener fits, so this is a fixed fastener fit, and that's a fixed fastener fit, but this is a floating fastener fit, so we'll need a wrench on the other side of this. All right, here we go. There's one. If we lift this up a little bit, this will come right out. And then we'll use the wrench on the other side of this guy. Lift it up again, pull this puppy out. This particular shock has these spacers on there, so we're going to have to put those in properly when we go to put the new arm in. And let's take out this one. Again, 14 millimeter. Okay, here's a little Allen key, and I'm just going to stick it on the back end and give it a little shove, and that bolt should be able to pop out. Stick it on the back. Oh, there she goes. And then this rear arm should be loose. There we go. There's the rear arm. To take off the rear caliper, we'll just have to take off two 14 millimeter bolts. The first one is right here. Let me shine a light on it. Right there. And then the second one right there. So we're going to take those off right now. For the top one, we'll use a wrench. There we go. Okay, when you pull this thing out, just make sure you note that there are washers on both of the caliper screws. So don't lose them because they're not captured. Boop. There you go. They're locking nuts actually, or locking washers rather. And then I'm going to pull this caliper off just like this. Again, I'm underneath the vehicle and I'm looking out. These are the two 12 millimeter bolts that we got to take off right there. Those two guys. Those are the two 12 millimeter bolts that we have to take off to get the caliper and the line released from the trailing arm. So it goes right through where the thread goes for the bolt. And it is attached to the hard line, and then this line right here is nice and easy. No pressure on it whatsoever. Okay, to remove the tow arm, I place the camera underneath the car, and again I'm looking forward, so that direction is the front of the car. Here's the solid tow arm that we're trying to take out. I'm going to remove this 14 millimeter right here. I'm going to take that thing completely out, and then I'm only going to loosen this one, and the reason why I'm going to only loosen that one is because I just want this tow arm to drop down like this. It's 14 millimeter again. And again, all I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen it. Just enough so that way I can rotate that thing down, just like that. Now to knock out or remove the trailing arm bushing, all you got to do is take out the 17 millimeter bolt right here, and then there's another 17 millimeter bolt on the other side. So 17 millimeter. Just pull the rubber off, and that'll lighten up just a tiny bit. Okay, so I have my knee supporting this section here, and I'm hanging on to the other side with my left hand. You can see it right here. So my left hand's hanging on there, and my knee is supporting it. And I'm just going to knock out those screws, or those bolts, right up there. Okay, 14 millimeter. Sometimes these guys get stuck in here, so you might have to whack this thing with a hammer. But you can see right here, this is where it gets stuck. It gets pushed in there and it gets stuck in there, kind of cinched in there supposedly. Anyhow, if you have to knock it out with a hammer, then knock it out with a little hammer. Here's the whole trailing arm assembly. And we still need to remove this guy right here. So I'm going to remove that with a 14 right now. Pull that guy out. Old one is out. So this is the trailing arm assembly, and I want you to make note of a couple things. One, its orientation. So this is the front, and this is the rear of the car. Obviously this is the outside because this is where the wheel sits and where the hub sits. But one thing that's important to notice about the trailing arm bushing is that one side is shorter than the other. This side right here is about 1 7/8, and this side, which is the inside, is about 2 7/8. And I'm measuring to the actual bushing just to see which one's longer. So again, the outside one is the short side, the inside one is the longer side. And again, this is the driver's side. So the other thing we got to do is we also got to take this guy off right here. So let's do that right now. 14 millimeter. Pops right out. This is the factory one. It has the rubber bushings in it, and obviously we are going with the sphericals from PCI. This is the trailing arm bushing on the driver's side. Now you could look real closely right here and you could tell that this thing is fried. It is completely toasted. It's barely hanging on. It's actually completely broken on that side. See that? And then this side is about to let loose. So to push this thing out, we're going to have to support the backside right here, and then press on this section to push it through the actual trailing arm. So you could actually use one of this tool right here, which is made by Chalet or SP Tools, and it's the 65100. Let's take a look inside. So this is actually kind of a little bit of a press. And I'm not going to use this tool, but you could use this on the car. You can take a look at some of the instructions here. You can see how it all sets up. It kind of, this piece right here grabs onto the trailing arm. You can see it grabbing onto the trailing arm right there. And then you put the little cup on it and you push the thing through. Okay, so we're here at my hydraulic press. This is just a 20-ton hydraulic press from Harbor Freight. I modified it a little bit, so instead of using a regular hydraulic bottle, I'm using an air over hydraulic bottle, so that way I have an air switch on there. Anyway, let's set this thing up. So I'm just pretty much going to put this right here, and then I'm going to put this SP tool right on top of it. And then I'm going to try and get this thing lined up with the ram, but I'm going to use this plate right here to distribute the load a little bit. Keep in mind, this is quite dangerous, so make sure you're wearing your safety gear. And I'm going to bring the air bottle down now. Now, before it touches down, I want to make sure it's perfectly centered, so that way I get excellent load distribution on there. And before I get going, I'm going to wait until the compressor finishes cycling, so that way I have full amount of pressure on there. But until then, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a tug. A little bit of pressure down there, and then I'll wait until the compressor catches up with me. So now that the compressor's caught up, I'm going to make sure, again, that we're all in line and that the trailing arm bushing can actually fall through these two supports right here. And then I'm going to hang on to this guy and be careful, because this thing's, when it comes out, it's coming out. So here we go. All right, here's the trailing arm bushing removed out of the trailing arm assembly. So the next thing you want to do is you want to clean up this area real quick. And what we're looking for is we're looking for areas that might be proud in this area right here. If there are a little bit areas that are proud here, a little piece of metal sticking up or something like that, you want to make sure that you grind those down so that the bushing from PCI sits flat when it's installed. Okay, so the instructions call out for a plate. So this is the drill plate, and make sure you get the right one. In instructions, it shows you which is the right one. For the DC2, it's the one with only 2 holes. There's another one that has 3 holes in it, but we'll be using this one. So what I'm looking for is, I want to make sure that there's a nice reveal down in here, and it looks like it can't go very far, so it looks like it's positioned pretty well. So with this thing positioned properly, I'm going to add some clamps to right there, and maybe one right here, just to hold this thing down. And let's just check it, make sure that's good. That's good. Now I'm going to use what's called a transfer punch. It's almost like a center punch, but you pick particular diameters. There's different diameters, and this diameter fits perfect into my drill template. So what I do is put this thing right here and give it a good whack. Okay, so now all we got to do is take that off, and we have 2 little divots where we could drill holes. Again, the key to this thing is that it is the correct diameter to fit into or right through the drill template, and so that makes sure that our center punch, or the punch, is right in the middle of that hole. If you use a center punch, you may be off just a little bit, so you got to be careful with that. Again, transfer punch. You can get them at Harbor Freight. The key to drilling is stepping up the holes. So first thing we did, we put a punch in here, a transfer punch specifically, and that puts a little divot so that way our drill bit can sit in there. This is a brand new 1/8 inch bit, and I'm just going to run through here, and I'm not even going to put a lot of pressure. I'm just going to let the drill do the work. Let's do this again. Find the center of the hole, and then we'll go for it again. Let the drill do the work. New drill bits are your friend. So now I'm going to use a 1364 to come through one more time to step it up just a little bit. This is a new drill bit again. Quick check. Just make sure, put our template back in here, and that thing looks like it's money. Okay, so now before we go to the final size, you want to make sure that you measure this thing and make sure that your drill bit is the correct size. All right, so before we drill this hole to the final size, let's measure the bolt that's used to hold down the PCI piece. So let's take a look at this guy. This is a metric bolt, but it measures 0.380. And that is 3/8/6, so that's going to be a perfect size for it to drop right through. And this infraction is a 25/64. And the last thing you want to do is clean up these holes, and we're going to use a debore tool. And this puts a small chamfer on the very beginning of the hole, and that way it's nice and flat and we don't have any burrs sticking up, pushing the PCI piece up and not allowing it to sit flat. So just feel that with your hand, make sure everything's good. Go to this side as well. It feels pretty good to me, and don't forget to do the other side as well. Okay, here's a quick look at my debore tool. This is the debore tool right here. And you can get these on McMaster. They have replaceable blades, so you could use it the way I was using it, where you push it in this particular direction and you start screwing in there. Also, you could push it through a blind hole, push it through the hole, and then flick this little switch, and then it flops it over, and now you could pull through the hole and you could do the backside of it. So that's good for blind holes. But keep in mind, if you're doing a blind hole, the metal shavings will stay inside the hole, so you got to be able to blow that out, or just make sure you're okay with those shavings being in there. So we finished drilling the holes. Let's make sure and double check that everything fits. So here's the trailing arm bushing, the spherical bushing. Let's wipe this off here. Now we're going to put this on here, and let's just double check, make sure our screws fit. Everything goes in nicely, and that is money right there. So now you ask me, what about corrosion, AJ? Well, I like to use a little bit of anti-seize right in here, and I'm going to put it on the back side too, and that's going to stop everything from corroding. This is an alternative to painting it. And clean up just a tiny bit. It just has to have a nice little coat, and then it'll never rust. Get some of that excess out of there because it's not needed. And then it's along the bottom as well. Rub-dub-dub, and we're finished. Next, let's put this guy in here. And the way it goes is, again, you have to pick the correct piece, and per the instructions, it'll tell you which one's the right one. This is the correct one. It goes just like this. So the PCI goes on the outside, and the arrow points towards up. And we're going to put that in just like that. And drop our screws in. And then I'm going to put these washers on the bottom, put the lock nut on here. Once I get them started, I'll flip it over and just make sure everything's sitting properly, and then we'll give it a final torque. This is an Allen key on the outside over here, 6mm, and then it calls out for 20 to 25 foot-pounds of torque. So I'm just going to torque this puppy up. First, I'm going to get this one snug before I even torque it. So that one's snug, and then I'm going to go to the other one and snug it up as well. Okay, that's snug. Let's check the fit real quick. Let's make sure everything looks good. This area looks flat. This area looks flat as well. Let's check the back. The back looks good as well. So let's give it a final torque. Okay, that's 25 foot-pounds there. That's 25 foot-pounds there. And that is the final installation of the PCI spherical trailing arm bushing for the DC2. So here we have the trailing arm assembly still on the bench. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to install the toe arm right now. But the key is this big PCI is on one side, and then the small PCI is on the other side. So since this is going to be facing inside, that's the way I want to orient this piece. So we just grab this little bolt out of here. Now I coated all of the bolts with anti-seize. And anti-seize is your friend. And we're just going to put this right in here, line it up. There's 47. So the reason why we torque this one right now is because we can't reach that one with a torque wrench when we're in the car. Now to put in the camber adjustment, and we're going to cut this guy right here. And this piece actually goes in just like this. So I'm going to take this out. This I don't have to fully torque because we can totally access this thing. So just going to slide it in here. And we'll get it snug. We got to remember to torque that down a little bit later. Okay, so now I'm going to pick up the whole trailing arm assembly, and I'm going to hook up the camber adjustment at this section right here with the two 14mm bolts. So I'm going to lift it up with the left hand, and I'm sitting on the ground. Lift up with the left hand, and I'm going to position that right about there and squeeze some bolts in here. Take the gun, give it a little tap. We'll torque these down momentarily. Okay, so now it's time to put in the rod which goes through the trailing arm spherical bushing, and that'll attach it to the vehicle. And keep in mind, I definitely did some coating right here with some anti-seize. Again, anti-seize is your friend. So we're just going to slip this thing in here, short side to the outside, and put it just like that. Now we're going to take the 2 bolts that go into the rod that goes through the trailing arm spherical bushing, and we're going to push it straight up. Alright, so now we are underneath the vehicle again, and I'm looking forward, and this is the tie rod with the spherical bearings on it. So we need to add the spacers, so I'm going to push this thing down. That thread moves around, so you got to kind of make note where it is. Put the bolt through this section here and get it to go into those threads, meanwhile catching all the spacers in this thing. There are the spacers, just like this. One goes on this side, one goes on that side. Oop, there we go. Again, we're going to use the factory bolt. It's coated with anti-seize. Again, anti-seize is your friend. Now, I think that insert is right here. Yep, made it in. And then I'll zap it down real quick. And again, this is going to be adjusted by ChewWorks eventually. To install the lower rear arm, all you got to do is take the tie wrap off, which I already cut off, and then use the factory bolt and just drop this guy right into here. Again, it's coated with anti-seize. Okay, we'll come back and torque all that stuff. Now we're going to release the caliper, which is hanging right here, and we want to get the line up and out of the way. So this piece actually goes on just like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this, I'm going to put it right up here, and I'm going to hang it over the top. I'm just going to leave it there for a second. And then I'm going to bring this up, and I'm going to install the lower half here. Just cut that off like that. Just got to rotate it so it's perfectly parallel, and it should slide right in, just like that. And then grab factory bolt. Again, coated with anti-seize, and there we go. Zap it with a gun. We'll come back and torque that a little bit later. So my shocks have these little guys on them, so it needs to be fitted a little bit differently. So they have to fit in here like that, and it kind of centers this thing to that. Let's grab the factory bolt, again coated with anti-seize, and we're going to pick up the whole rear assembly right here and we'll lift it up with the knee, put this guy like that, and then first we'll put this here, use the screw in here. Now we're lined up, shoved in, and we'll go to the back side and put this spacer in as well. There it goes. Put the factory nut on, cinch it down, and then we'll torque that up in just a second. Okay, let's finish off the bracket for the brake line. And again, these are the factory bolts, coated with anti-seize again. And let's use a 12mm. Give these things a little bit of torque. We'll come back in and final torque those in a little bit. Okay, don't forget to put on the rotor. Add on one of the lug nuts and zap it down. That way you can put the brake caliper on. Now, take the caliper and separate the pads a little bit with a screwdriver. Just make sure they're separated a little bit. And now you can kind of squeeze it right onto the rotor. There you go. Here's the back side of the caliper. Again, use the factory nut or the bolt, and it has a locking washer on there. Don't forget that. And just kind of stick it right in here and wiggle this thing around until you can get it started. And there, it's started. So you're going to take a 14mm and zap that thing down. And then go to the top and do the exact same thing. The top one is a little bit further up. It's in right behind here. And you're going to do that section next. 14 millimeter. All right, let's tackle the emergency brake cable. So here's the emergency brake cable. Route this through this hole right here and stick it out like that. And then we can put this thing in here. And again, I'm going to take that factory bolt coated with anti-seize again. I'm just going to hand tighten this one in here. We'll come back in and torque that in just a second. Now we're going to go to the other side and take a look at this emergency cable and connect it up. Okay, so now that we've mounted the emergency cable through the little hole, this hole right here in the trailing arm assembly, we're going to wrap this thing around here and put it like that. And now we got to route it through that guy right here, and then it'll go over to this lever arm right there. I'll try to do it all through the camera. So this has got to push through here. There we go. There, that's the way it's seated properly. Now we're going to put a safety clip right in here, and then we'll be all good. The safety clip goes just like that. We'll give it a little push. Just push that down a little bit. You have to tap that a little bit with a hammer and get it flush with there, and then it'll be set properly. But that's how it sits. Okay, let's do some torquing. This is a 14 millimeter, and I'm going to torque this caliper to 41 foot-pounds. So this is an extension made by Snap-on. Okay, here, I'll let you take a look at this piece right here. This is the extension, and it has a wobble bit or a universal bit attached to it. It's 14 millimeter. Great tool to have. So let's do the bottom. That's 41 foot-pounds. Okay, here's the back of the caliper, and we're going to hook the emergency line right in here. And I'm taking the factory pin, which is right here, and again I coated it with anti-seize. There we go. You can see the little pinhole there. Just going to push that right in here, right there, and she is in. Okay, so now let's do some torquing. So this is a fixed fastener fit, 14 millimeter, and this is the end of the lower control arm, 40 foot-pounds. This is the shock mount, again, torquing it to 40 foot-pounds. You want to rotate the nut so that way, just in case there's some resistance on the bolt, it won't give you a false torque reading. There's 40. And then we'll go over to the other end, to the chassis side. Give me a 40 right over here as well. 40 foot-pounds. Okay, now let's torque the camber adjustment on the outer side. This is 40 foot-pounds here. Okay, let's do the chassis side of the camber adjustment. This is 29 foot-pounds. I'm going to use 16 foot-pounds on this brake line cable here. That's 16. This is a 12 millimeter socket that I'm using. And then over here, it's another 12 millimeter, 16 foot-pounds. Okay, now we're going to torque this guy right here, which is the trailing arm spherical bushing. And this is 47 foot-pounds. And do the outside. And last but not least, we are going to torque the toe adjustment, but keep in mind, this is going to be done by CheWorks as well. That's 47. So Rob's going to loosen this guy right here, and he'll adjust the toe however it needs to be, and then he'll retighten that one. This lower control arm for the rear does not have threads in these 3 holes for the sway bar. So I couldn't put this guy in just quite yet because I don't have a bolt that's long enough. So I'm just going to calculate this overall thickness right here plus the thickness of this lower control arm, and then add a little bit extra for the nut that'll go on the back, and then I'll run that all the way through. And I believe that I'm going to use a 70mm bolt, and I'll use a 10 by 1.25 class 10.9. I'm going to get that from McMaster. And so once I do that, I'll push that all the way through there, and then I'll torque it up to 29 foot-pounds per the factory spec.